everyone. Our latest threat report, which is about BEC in the financial services sector. My name is Abu Qureshi. I lead the threat intel and disruption team here at Before AI, and I'm joined by...
Hi everyone, I'm Rishika Desai, and I'm threat researcher and writer here at Before AI.
Excellent. So the report we made for BEC in the financial services sector is split for a time range of 3 months, going from April 1st until June 30th. And what we're going to be doing is talking about our findings, metrics, trends, interesting things that we've seen from a PreCrime perspective and using our technology to see how across 31 core financial service brands, we saw very interesting activity. And we'll start walking through that now. So I'll kick it off to Rishika to start that off, and then we'll discuss some of those findings.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Abu. So I think before we start, let's emphasize on the fact that how sensitive financial transactions are for every user and customer. And by the way, according to one of the latest reports, it was found out that just in Q1 2025, phishing accounted for at least 30.9% of all activities in finance sector. That said, I mean, the threats are never supposed to stop, and it just seems that it's going to rise from here as well. Now, that said,
the APWG report, right?
Yes, APWG report. And out of which, I mean, BEC is such an interesting vector that these days cyber criminals are leveraging, because they are not only the typical emails that you get in your inbox, but they are calculated, they're targeted attempts that blend in different elements like social engineering. There are spoofed identities and majorly to trick employees into transferring funds or even, leaking their sensitive data. Now, that said, this kind of motivated us to research more on BEC, and that's how this research came into existence.
Yeah, that's a great point. And another really interesting thing is that it's not always limited to a certain sector, right? In this case, we're talking about finance, but BEC as a whole just continues to be an easy and quick method, an effective method for cyber criminals to achieve their goals. And one really good point, Rishika, that you brought up is how it's changed. So it's not so much anymore a spear phish with just a lure and a phishing campaign. There is the use of Gen AI to enhance BEC across various platforms, changing the lure, monitoring and feedback from respondents, really taking into account the social engineering aspect, whereas before BEC had to be, despite its somewhat ease of use for cyber criminals, it still had to be manual. But now, with the use of Gen AI, it's become a lot easier to scale these large BEC campaigns. So you blend social engineering and the use of Gen AI with these very sophisticated, at times, modular phishing kits and login portals. So some of the old tactics, but also some new behavior that we've seen using AI as a tool. So yeah, that's very interesting of how it's evolved.
Yeah, I agree. And let's just not talk about the domains, but also the different TLDs that we observed in this particular research. So as interesting and as far as I could recall, we found out there was .finance, .financial, there was .loan, .cash, .funds. I mean, all of these TLDs do indicate that this domain has to do something with financial services. And it also gives an edge to cyber criminals that they can put any kind of content targeting any particular brand, and still that would just go undetected for as long as it runs.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. Where before the TLDs were very generic, that's also new, where the TLDs are finance focused. We've seen so much activity across the board on some of the new TLDs, particularly .shop is one that's heavily involved in a lot of scams, kind of related to e-commerce and finance. But the ones that you mentioned are very niche, like .exchange, .market, .insurance. These are very, very, obviously very targeted. And the interesting thing is that for some of these, it's not as easy to spin up campaigns as it would be on .com or .info, which were the highest hits in our research. So it's really interesting that they do end up using some of these finance-themed TLDs, because scaling is easier with the older and more basic TLDs. So it has to be a very, niche and specific target. So I think the number and the sheer volume that we saw was quite interesting. And another interesting thing was the rise in June, especially towards the end of June, where in one day in June alone, we peaked at around 81 registrations, and we think that this timing is not coincidental. It lines up well with the seasonal retail sales, summer rush, and back to school, and that whole summer busy period, as well as for travel related promotions. So the finance sectors or retail/finance sector is one that certainly peaks or has dips and peaks throughout the year. But this is very interesting that in our findings, we noticed very clearly that there was a sharp rise near that start of summer.
Yes, interestingly. And also, do you know what happens to all of this data that's been harvested? Because we have seen so many login panels which were a part of phishing campaign. So interestingly, we also discovered that all of these become a part of cybercrime ecosystem eventually, because all of this data is being sold on different dark web marketplaces, cybercrime forums, and then further used for sophisticated social engineering, or they could be also used to conduct different kinds of attacks such as carding or skimming, depending on what's being stolen. I know there is like login data at risk, there is credit and debit cards data at risk. So that said, we also discovered some Telegram channels which were offering this data on a subscription basis. And to imagine all of this sensitive data being landing up on cybercrimes forums is really a concerning thing.
Yeah, absolutely, and the data theft and the resale of data is one thing certainly, and as you mentioned, there's evidence of what's happening with that. With the dual pronged approach of attackers, where they will take the data that they've retrieved and profit off of that, and then also obviously profit off of the credential theft or the stolen funds and the wire fraud that usually happens with BEC. But another interesting thing is that it's not limited to just that anymore either. We saw interesting lures like fake help desk pages, survey scams, blogs, redirects to different crypto exchanges. And there's also cases of very ambiguous branding where it's not a very clear lookalike in terms of content to a financial institution, but instead it will use some elements of the styling, but actually redirect to gambling or crypto or survey fraud. So I would say that the tactics aren't completely technical anymore. There's also a psychological element where, as an attacker, it might be start to be more obvious to people what a insert financial institution, whatever, Chase Bank, Bank of America, whoever is their victim of choice that day. Spotting that fish with user awareness is becoming sort of easier for people, but redirecting to crypto exchanges and crypto related scams and survey sites definitely is still a new area for a lot of consumers, especially the trust that is sort of a gray area for a lot of people when they don't know about a lot of these exchanges and cryptocurrencies. And so that I felt was interesting too, that there's a lot of there's a big element of redirect for survey fraud and crypto exchanges.
Yeah, totally. I think this could be a reason because, or I can try to answer why this happens, is because crypto and financials are kind of connected with each other, because banks and wallets often have transactions. And that said, this is a unique opportunity for cyber criminals to kind of pivot into both the zones while not being dedicated to either one. And such phishing pages can tend to be more profitable because they can also steal banking data, and at the same time, they can steal your authentication measures, they can steal your wallet data associated with your crypto account. And that simply means more profit.
Yeah, absolutely. And another interesting, I think, piece here, which sort of leads into our next point of mitigation and recommendations, is dormant infrastructure. So we saw particularly with some leading brands like Payoneer and Lending Club, which are related to the obviously finance sector, there was a big batch, and something we continue to see at Before AI, was registered domains, sort of pre-DNS activation or post, but in a parked state or not yet ready to be weaponized, that were not yet active, but there were elements of future malicious activity, whether these are in the staging state. And to us, that's a red flag. It suggests future advanced staging, and obviously it underscores the need for predictive defense, which does lead us to our I think next and final point of, Rishika, what can people, corporations, researchers, individuals, what is some recommendations for this?
I think there are two aspects to answer this. One is the traditional measures that we have always known. So how about I cover the traditional ones and you take us into the future,
Sure.
right? Okay, so what I believe that the traditional measures are still equally important as we are advancing towards AI that can be used for detection capabilities. But to simply highlight them, how about we enforce email policies that secures the attachments, that monitors them? There has to be regular employee security awareness training. And at the same time, people are still encouraged to reset their passwords or even update their multi-factor authentication, which is not being done at a large scale, we believe. Other than that, I believe with respect to third-party vendors who are also vulnerable to BEC should also be checked for their email security and other levels of security rather than relying just on their onboarding assessment. Now that these traditional measures are covered, let us know how can we tackle these threats preemptively.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of our findings in this report, they underscore the need of moving from that reactive model to a predictive model. It's no longer a luxury, it is a requirement. And it becomes more and more clear when we start to see these patterns. And the patterns, even though they have slight modifications, they're not changing so as much. The fingerprints and the breadcrumbs that are left by past attacks of a similar nature are things that we can pick up on to say with high confidence that this activity is going to be bad in the future. And having that proactive element and using predictive defense really puts us in an area of strong deterrence where we are consistently hurting the ROI of these attackers and making sure that they don't have as much motivation to go after these industries because the return on investment is just not there sometimes when you are flagging and disrupting infrastructure preemptively. So I think building on top of those traditional and very valuable points that Rishika made on mitigation, there is also a changing landscape, which I think is very important for all of us to know about. Just like the attackers are advancing and using AI techniques and different methods to scale their operations. Similarly, we as defenders and any corporation in the general finance sector that needs to protect itself needs to scale for that operation as well on the defensive side. So yeah, I will wrap up this point by saying that the shift from that reactive whack-a-mole needs to shift to a more of a predictive model.
That was truly insightful, Abu. Thank you for that.
Okay, so I think that covers our review of the BEC sector or threat report for BEC in the financial services sector. It's a bit of a mouthful, but I hope you enjoyed hearing about the report. And please do read the report and check it out. There's more in there in comparison to what we've spoken about. We're going through a good amount of detail on our findings, and we also have really cool metrics in there about registrar activity, registrants, TLDs, DNS activity, some of the predictive elements as well that we discussed with very clear examples. So yes, I hope you enjoyed this from PreCrime Labs, and be on the lookout for more.
Surely. See you all in the next session.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.